Welcome to another episode of Beyond Physical, where we talk about the mental, emotional, social, and at times spiritual benefits of exercise. We believe that exercise is more than movement, and this podcast is our attempt at sharing that message with the world by sharing our own as well as our guests' experiences and knowledge. If you enjoy it, we ask that you please spread the message by leaving a rating and review, or even better, by sharing with a friend. Now, onto the show. Greetings. Welcome, Gideon. Welcome, friends. Welcome all.
Good to be back.
Mark, yeah, it's been a couple of weeks. Where have you been, bro? Where
Well,
have you been hiding?
it's one effective week of missing podcast, but
People have missed you. It's been about 2 weeks.
yeah,
surely.
2 weeks. Because
The last two episodes, I don't think you've been on,
no,
which is different.
different.
But it's good to have things back to the way they were, but in a different sense, very different, because we're outside. For those of you who are watching at home, you can see us. We're in a different setting. Those listening, you can't see, but we're in our little patio area. It's quite nice. But an eventful weekend. Half of Cape Town was up in Knysna, where I was too, running the Knysna Marathon. Hands down the most beautiful marathon I've run. So if anyone's looking at doing a picturesque, scenic marathon, that is definitely the one you want to look at. However, I would not recommend it as your first marathon because it's rough, it's hard. It's not an easy course. I heard a couple of people saying, yeah, this is my first marathon going for X time. And I ran the route and I was like, I don't think I would ever look to run a certain time on that course because it is vert like you've never seen it. It's pretty much just a trail run. It's on gravel the whole way, but it is 10 out of 10. It is so beautiful. So I would definitely recommend it for that. We are going to chat about another cool event over the weekend, but not so specifically that thing, more so the topic in general, which is rugby players as athletes and what makes them special, what sets them apart. Gideon's obviously very knowledgeable on strength and conditioning, and I've played a little bit of rugby, and we both watch rugby and enjoy the sport, so it's going to be cool to tap into that. Obviously the Springboks coming away with a comprehensive victory over the weekend against the Welsh.
Very enjoyable watch.
It was fun to watch, but I thought it was interesting. We should have tapped into Robbie Gillett for this podcast because the man is the rugby fundi, but yeah, it was interesting because it seemed like a little bit of a scrappy game, but it was still so clear that we were the dominant side. And yeah, Springbok rugby is in such a good place.
That pack strength is on another level.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
That scrum is just something else.
It's
still amazing to watch.
But we've got depth across the board as well, which is really cool. And it came through with most of the new guys, the debutants, playing pretty well, which is exciting. Obviously, Edwill getting the man of the match on his debut, which he really deserved that as a human as well as just playing an outstanding game of rugby. But what we're really here to talk about, aside from scores and rugby jargon, is what is your kind of quintessential rugby playing athlete, and what makes that interesting, and why are they impressive athletes? And I think the first and most noticeable thing about a rugby player is their size. They are big human beings. They carry a lot of mass, but they also move very effectively and quickly. Obviously, most of the game is played in a kind of the plane of backwards and forwards, but there's a lot of lateral movement as well. So to be moving around, we don't have exact stats, but probably on average, an average rugby player is probably 105 kilos, and they are moving so nimbly. That is no feat to kind of take lightly. So I think that is something that really does set them apart, is how big they are and how strong they are, and how that still doesn't really impair their movement. But I'd be interested to find out for you, Gideon, what is it about rugby players as athletes that you think kind of sets them apart from other athletes, and what, as a strength and conditioning coach, you find interesting about the sport in terms of the strength aspect and getting people ready to play that game.
Yeah, I find my favorite athlete to coach, especially with strength conditioning, is a rugby player, just because you can tackle so many different facets of their training. They need to be strong, they need to be durable, they need to be able to keep up the pace. If they play the full 80 minutes, they have to be able to keep that up, as well as be agile and weighing 105 kilos, when that ball's going sideways, they're going to have to know how to track forwards, backwards without, snapping an ankle. So, and then that goes into also to having that 105 kg rugby player also needs to be extremely mobile. And, when you think of someone that big, last thing you think is, are they going to be mobile? So to be able to be strong and to be mobile is quite incredible. And I think to marry all those facets together into one athlete is truly incredible. Like, someone like a runner, like an endurance runner, is just training to, like run a marathon at a certain time, where a rugby player needs to do so many different things at once on the field, and every single game is going to be different to the previous one. And there's so many different areas that they need to work on in order to be the best player they can be possible. And that's why I find like strength and conditioning specifically for rugby players is so enjoyable for me as a strength and conditioning coach.
It's really cool what you say about there being kind of a wide, there's a very broad spectrum of skill sets, S&C wise, that rugby players have to
Completely.
tick. And I think breaking it down to very kind of popularized fitness term, rugby players are essentially the original hybrid athletes. Because, I mean, rugby, I think, and maybe triathlons are longer standing than rugby, but it still doesn't incorporate that strength element that rugby does. And there's a huge range as well in kind of phenotypically what rugby players look like. Like you get little rugby players and you get huge rugby players.
Completely.
Obviously, the little ones are still not particularly little.
No.
But regardless, they're strong, they're fast. I mean, like the baseline strength levels are ridiculous. In any context, you'd be like, that is a very strong person. Also, their kind of 30, 40-yard dash, you'd kind of be able to put most of them on the line, get them to run that and be like, that's pretty remarkable, no matter what shape or size they are. So they are these kind of generalist athletes, but they're exceptional in most of those proficiencies.
I find also the fascinating thing is to like be extremely strong, but then be strong multiple times in like a game, for example. So they're having to exert maximal force multiple times. Like, for example, Olympic lifter or power lifter, does their 1 rep max and then, rest for 5 minutes, or for example. Whereas a rugby player, you're exerting maximal force multiple times every couple minutes. If it's from sprinting across the field or, getting into the pack or going through for different phases and stuff, that's and they're having to exert that over and over and over again and keeping it like continuous. And that also does separate certain teams from others. That if the back line can handle the forwards continuously over and over and over again.
Yes, and they're also they're so conditioned to recover quickly.
Yeah.
So you'll have that impact. I mean, there was that situation in the Bok game with Edwill making a tackle, and then there was an offload and recovering and making another tackle.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Like looking at that kind of run of plays, like I don't think so. You are smashing into somebody full force.
And keep in mind that you basically like blacked out, knocked out. Like you don't know where you are. You didn't even know you're on a rugby field. And then you can get back up and grab the oak's leg.
And you do a burpee.
And you don't know where he is.
Exactly.
That's the proprioception of these players is crazy. Because you get like knocked out and you're on the back and you're on your back and you don't know where the player is. And to be able to get back someone onto your feet and grab the oak is incredible.
Yeah, and you need to be very conditioned to maintain that level of awareness under fatigue.
Completely.
Because it's like, it's almost, you're having to tap into a lot of kind of reflex and autonomous kind of movement where it's just like you're going with what feels like instinct, and you can only carry those tasks out if you're extremely conditioned. It's really amazing as well that with all the size that they have, they've got phenomenal base, kind of a phenomenal aerobic base, because a lot of the players are playing the full duration of the game. And I mean, to do any activity for an hour and a half almost is really, really tough. And I mean, add to that contact. I actually like to think of rugby as an 80-minute organized wrestling match to try and get a ball over a line, because there's a lot of isometric as well. It's all different elements of strength and conditioning, whether there's the impact where you're trying to dominate that kind of point of contact, get over the advantage line or take someone back over the advantage line. Then there's the squeezing and holding and isometric, where you've got to be strong in that kind of holding
100%.
position. And there's also the thing of they are big guys who are falling down a lot. So, and falling is a very, obviously that's a skill that you learn. You learn how to fall kind of properly over time, but that's also something that's very taxing when you hit the ground to not break your wrist or something like that when you are carrying the amount of weight that they do. But I think, yeah, for me, what really sets them apart is that element of ticking multiple boxes. Because if you take a sport like American football, which is often compared to rugby, you have specialized players. So in rugby, yes, you have positions like a scrum half who's generally a little bit smaller, and you have your front row players who are bigger and a lot more powerful. But everyone is playing pretty much all the time.
The
Whereas
little guy can tackle the massive oak that's running towards him and
Exactly.
catch him, and yeah, that's the beauty of the sport as well. Is that yes, there are different positions, but they all can effectively do it.
Yes.
Even the big guys can run fast.
Exactly.
That's the thing.
And it's amazing to see because I mean if you go, as I was saying, into an American football context, you have offensive and defensive sides. I mean I don't know the sport in huge depth, but there are specific players for specific kind of strategic I don't know, times in the game where it's like, okay, we're defending now, so we have a whole different group of players. Okay, we're attacking now, so we have an entirely different group of players. Whereas in rugby, everyone attacks and everyone defends. So everyone has to be proficient at all the different.
Completely.
Obviously, they're your specialized tasks like throwing in at a line out or feeding at a scrum or whatever it may be, kicking and stuff. But generally, everyone's pretty solid across the board. It's interesting though because if you look at it like that as well, whilst rugby players are remarkable in how they can cover a whole lot of different bases in terms of their strength and conditioning, I find that you see far fewer kind of players who have this, I don't know, this striking speed or strength specifically. You'll see that, like, obviously everyone's very strong and fast, but you'll see it more often in football where there'll be someone who ran a sub 10 100 meter because they're a wide receiver. They have the specific task of running fast, positioning themselves, and catching the ball. Whereas in rugby, it's far less likely because, I mean, everyone is conditioned to do multiple different things.
I think that a big thing is that like every rugby player on the field should be equipped to do what's necessary when the ball comes to them. It doesn't matter what position they're in or what they need to do with it. So even the big guys, if they got the ball and they can run through, they must be able to run through. So I think that's also important that each player's conditioning and strength is slightly tailored towards their position, yes, but they all need to be able to be competent in all of the facets equally.
And that's, it's cool that you have that insight from a theoretical standpoint because from my time playing rugby in the strength and conditioning programs, our strength and conditioning, so I mean, I did play forwards and backs, but as a backline player towards the end of my time playing, I did the exact same stuff as the forwards. The only thing that was different was they would have like general weight that you had to hit as a back or as an outside back or whatever it may be, and then they had general weights that you had to be able to hit as a tight five player or a forward. But otherwise, everyone was doing fundamentally the kind of same lifts, the same kind of sets and reps, and having to be proficient in the same ways as everyone else, even though your positions are totally different.
And that's how it really does work in like group, like team strength conditioning for rugby players. Like majority of the time you'll do the workouts together and there'll be some slight alterations. And then if there's some more specific positions or if a player is lacking in a certain area, then you'll do extras with one-on-one with strength conditioning. And then you'll maybe focus a little bit more on explosive power if that's something that you're struggling with, or aerobic capacity, something like that. But generally the structure of the sessions would be, you would do your technique and field work with the other coach, and then all the stuff in the gym you would do as a team together, and then do extra work, especially with, I mean, rugby, there's a lot of the players are prone to injury, so either players are recovering from injury or they are playing on an injury, so that's where the extras will come into play. So they wouldn't benefit from doing like the group session, they would need to then do one-on-ones so they can, still perform optimally without injuring themselves further, or recover from their injury.
It's also kind of, I think the culture around rugby is very, at least from my experience, it's very kind of, I don't want to say I don't want to say militant. That's the wrong word, but it's very hard. It's
A
a
lot of
very
strap and play.
Yeah. It's like strap and play. Like get it done. Work through it. I think as your kind of level in the sport progresses, that does fade away a little bit. Like I think because you become more professional, they become a lot more receptive to subjective feedback. I don't know. I never went that far, but I think that as you progress, they become more aware of how important it is to get the kind of performance out of the players that they want by managing their load as well. But I mean, just culturally in general, it is a very hard sport.
It is.
Which I think kind of that's another really awesome thing about rugby players. I mean, I think all professional athletes do have a bit of a switch where they tap into a different kind of mindset where they're able to kind of bite the bullet and grind through something hard. Literally, I mean, I had such a misconception of golfers until I met Euban, and he explained the ins and outs of golf and how mentally intense it is and their strength and conditioning, and I never really gave golf the respect that it
Or
deserved.
just, you just show up to you
Yes.
just play around in golf and that's it.
And I wasn't aware of how important strength and conditioning was, and how that does set players apart significantly, and also just how much work they put into it. So all professional athletes, 99% of them are mentally on a different level. But I think specifically because there's that impact and that contact element of rugby, it brings out like a bit of a different level of mental toughness in the athletes.
And also, I would argue that strength conditioning is the most important for a rugby player. And I've found and I've seen a lot of school and even varsity players that have a lot of talent don't get access to strength and conditioning. They only play. They only have practice. 2, 3 times in the week, and then the weekend game. But no time in the gym. Maybe some like banded work on the field before, after training, but no weightlifting at all, or any form of extra work inside the gym, which a lot is left on the table without doing that. Like you can have the raw talent, but to have to gain the extra strength and conditioning inside the gym is unmatched. Like you'll never be able to beat that.
Totally.
If you only like practicing on the field and doing your weekend games, like there is a certain ceiling with talent for that.
And that's what
I've seen.
you actually see that across the board, because I remember seeing guys stay on after practice often. And a lot of those guys are the ones now who are in the Springbok side or are playing regularly at professional level, because yes, you get dealt a genetic deck of cards, and then you obviously also have a roll of the dice with what opportunities come your way, and there are also elements like how much of a people person you are, because being able to communicate and work in a team and kind of what is the word, like internalize what the coach is saying and then put that into your context on the field, those things all matter. But it's like the guys who went the extra mile, stayed an extra hour after practice to do their work-ons, those are the ones, for the most part, who are going all the way through. And at the same time, the guys who are doing the boring stuff in the gym. Because a lot of the time, rugby players do like to train. Like it's something that, they like pushing their bodies, they like having a bit of a weightlift session every now and then. But the stuff, like I know me personally, that I hated was like the prehab and rehab that the physio was giving me, and I like always neglected that because I found it boring. But the guys who did those diligently and meticulously and consistently, they are now coming through as the ones who are actually reaping the benefits.
And the biggest thing that I found with all my shadow work that I did during my degree was that a lot of the players that did do the extra work, the coaches, SNCs that I was shouting, were putting so much emphasis on prehab and posthab, even if they weren't injured. Like
Yes.
rugby is such like you have to prioritize injury prevention. Like even if it's not there, like it needs to be instilled in every single player.
You must do it proactively.
Exactly, because if you can be ahead of the curve, then you can actually lengthen your career, because a lot of rugby players' careers end in a split second and then it's gone. And then you never really get that mobility back in your shoulder or your knee or your hip, or you throw your back and then you never can get there. So the preemptive injury prevention through the strength training is so vital.
Also, with a lot of rugby players, as with most sports, it's a big confidence game, and making sure that you remain injury free allows you to build up momentum. It allows you to build that confidence where if you have an injury, a lot of people refer to them as setbacks. More than anything else, it's a mental setback, because now you have done something to your knee or you've done something to your back, and you're kind of hesitantly going about these movements and this training because you're scared.
And never regain the full confidence you once had. Yeah.
And that can end your career. It's actually not a thing of someone's injured so badly that they can never play again. They're injured and then they are mentally hindered, because they are like, is this hamstring the same it was before? Can I give it 100%, or am I going to do 85% because I'm scared that it's gonna tear? Because that ends up holding guys back a lot. Where, like I said, it's not actually the injury itself; it's what happens to their mindset thereafter. And it's very difficult to recover from that and to get full confidence. But another point that I was thinking of is that strength and conditioning, specifically in rugby, it's such a controllable for players. Like, it's such a, if you give it the time and effort, it should never be something that you are excluded from a team for, because you can control that. It's like you can go to the gym, you can go and run, you can whatever it may be to build up your strength and conditioning. And for the most part, the guys, I found that the most technically astute players who are gifted are oftentimes kind of lagging, at least at the beginning, on the strength and conditioning side. Obviously, as they progress, they either fall away or they will have to get conditioned enough. But it's like, if you have the technical ability, that SNC part is so much within your control. It's not something you want to be left out for, as I said. And I would actually argue that it's something that I think it. I would argue that the level that I got to was beyond where I was technically, but I got that far just because of the fact that I had a strong SNC base, where I could kind of ride along on that to progress, which says a lot about the sport, I think, and how coaches select.
It's just so highly volatile, the sport. It's just, as I said previously, it's like from one weekend to the next, you could like end your career from a severe injury. Some injuries, you can't control through, strength and conditioning. Sometimes the injuries are just so severe. It's a really like bad high tackle and something, happens, and shit just happens. But, you can always be ahead of that with the strength conditioning. And especially that what I've seen here in Cape Town, it's not that easily available to players.
The strength and conditioning.
Yeah. On the school to varsity level. Yes, there is more and more as the sport continues to grow and will grow. But I think it's just so important that school and varsity level, that's where all the filter comes from. And to not have players that can't gain access to SNC coaches and SSC facilities, it's just, that's kind of a big problem.
I think you're totally right, because it's often something that is mainly available to people who are at schools and clubs that have more resources available.
You see.
Which majority of people in South Africa aren't. So it makes it very difficult for people to get access to strength and conditioning, which could completely elevate their chances to actually kind of coming through and making it. Because if you get someone who pitches up at a trial for an under 16 provincial match and they have done a year and a half of strength and conditioning stuff at their school, and you get someone else who's come from a kind of relatively under-resourced school that's got no gym setup or anything, exactly the same technical ability, the person with access to the gym stuff 9 times out of 10 is going to get through.
And there's just so much talent. That's the thing. There's so many talented rugby players, but still the large majority of them won't gain access to anything more than just, their regular, as I said previously, the regular, weekly tactical training and practice, and then the weekend game. Large portion of them would never step into the gym, and until if they make like a varsity team or something like that, would never have access to any sort of SNC facility, which is just quite scary in a way.
Yeah, it is, and hopefully, kind of national interest in rugby is huge, especially at the moment with how well we're doing. But I think with time, as the interest continues to grow and people continue to kind of get behind the sport, there will be more investment, hopefully, in equipping places that otherwise wouldn't have been equipped with these facilities, and access is then given to people who, because it creates these opportunities for these fairy tale stories where for instance, Siya Kolisi was kind of, he found an opportunity for himself that otherwise may not have been there, to go to a school like Grey through rugby, and it's he's run with that, and it's elevated his whole life. And think about how many hidden Siya Kolisis there are, where there are these leaders, these role models, these people who can galvanize a country, bring a country together, that are diamonds in the rough, just not having access to the opportunity.
But it speaks to a large portion of sports across South Africa, though. All struggle with the same thing. There's like one facility for 5 different schools, kind of thing. Whereas there's just those facilities might not only just be gyms, but just be like courts or fields or anything. So,
or just coaches and the right
Yeah.
mentors, and having people in those spaces that can guide young people to the right opportunities. Maybe you've never picked up a rugby ball, but just go to the trial, try out, go have a go, and someone who's going to push them in the right direction. Because at this stage, unfortunately, for the most part, those opportunities pretty much only come through getting scholarships to big schools or big rugby schools, because what sets South Africa apart from a lot of other countries in terms of sport, mainly in Europe, is that our sporting system and our schooling system are integrated, whereas in Europe they're separate.
all additional.
It's all club. It's you don't go to high school and then part of the curriculum is compulsory sport. It's, you've got this thing where you just go and study, and then if you want, you play sport. Whereas here, they're tied into one another, which in a way actually makes sport less accessible, because you need to go to a good school to get access to sport. If you can't afford Bishops or Sachs or St Andrews or some big school, Paul Roos, Paul Jim, those kind of big rugby playing and sports playing schools, you can't just go and pay 200 Rand a month club fee to go and play at that school. And the opportunity, there are club teams, but they aren't anywhere near as well equipped as the schools.
Also extremely under-resourced.
Yes.
All the clubs. As I've been around to quite a few different SNC facilities around Cape Town, and the large majority of them are under-resourced. Too many people, not enough equipment, not enough space, not enough coaches. And that was another thing that I wanted to mention, was there's just not enough emphasis on good coaches. There's an incentive for coaches to be teaching the grassroots level of all sports in South Africa. There's definitely a gap there, as well as your top SNC coaches for rugby. There's also few of them. I spoke to when the Western Province Sports and Conditioning guy came to the gym. I was chatting to him, and he was explaining to me, they are heavily under-resourced when it comes to proficient coaches teaching guys at the top level, Whereas in other parts of the world, you would have multiple different coaches that would filter all the way down from the top all the way down. Junior coaches to assistant coaches. There's a real shortage here for that.
It's testament to the gold mine of opportunity that there is for people and that there is for South Africa in a sporting context, given that lack of infrastructure or that lack of sufficient kind of coaching and facility kind of availability of facilities. Because how are we still managing to be competitive, and how are so many players still coming through if there is this kind of burden on the system of like there isn't enough to support all of the talent that there is. And I think it is something that it was a big part of Nelson Mandela's what he spoke about he said sport has the power to change the world. That was one of his quotes, and I think it's something that it really does bring people together, and it's also a weird one for me if you think about it socially. What is the best way to create more opportunity? Because it's one thing to create these funds and these bursaries and scholarships at schools that kind of have the facilities already, which is great, and I think we should do more of. But it's a totally different thing, and I think a higher priority to develop opportunities and facilities within areas that don't have access to these things. Because what I noticed, and Mark, I'm not sure if you noticed this at all, and I don't know how big the sports program was at Herzliya, but when guys come in from different areas where culturally it's different to the school that's offering the scholarship, there are a lot of challenges for this young person who's coming into this like strange place, and it's like all these people are totally different from the people I grew up around. Now I must culturally and socially integrate, and that also, I think, puts a hurdle in front of them in terms of making the most of the opportunity, because you're having to socially integrate as well as, which is not a bad thing, you learn skills through doing that, but it's like if there was opportunity for people closer to home and they didn't have to trek all the way to these areas which are split up like that because of the heritage of South Africa, recent history, obviously apartheid and Group Areas Act and things like that, I think there would be a greater success rate in people who are given opportunities and their kind of scholarships and whatnot then translating into them managing to have that come to fruition after school. Because you get a lot of these amazing kind of these incredibly talented people who come into these systems, and then it does, like after school you don't hear about them because it's so difficult to support them through that journey and have resources, not just financial resources, emotional, social resources around, how do you navigate trying to integrate, how do you, because also I'm going very off here, but a lot of those high school environments can be quite hostile, where it's like kids are not trying to be, but kids are judgmental, and if you're different, you can get judged, and then it also makes things difficult. So I feel like how we approach as a country and people in South Africa, how we approach trying to create the opportunity is also really important.
It's almost like the big schools that are, your Bishops, Rondebosch, Sachs for rugby are kind of, it's almost gatekeeping the sport in a way. It's like it almost limiting access because there isn't that accessible club level where anyone could go, and it's just a place from multiple people from different backgrounds can go to. So you have to get a scholarship for that school so you can get in, and then only be able to get all the facilities so you can play rugby. So it's almost like it's being gatekept from the majority of South Africans, and that also goes to say with all the best facilities are just going to go to the best schools and the best universities and stuff, which again is such a small percentage of the population and such a small percentage of what talent is actually out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also built into the scouting and how coaches look for talent, because a lot of the time your school becomes a brand in rugby, where it's like, okay, we're immediately going to send scouts to Paul Boys, we're immediately going to send scouts to Paul Roos, to Bishops.
It's automatically like they only there.
Exactly.
Like they don't go anywhere else. They just know, okay, we need 5 new players. Let's send our guys to these 4 main schools, and they sit there for a semester or whatnot until they find what they need. But that's like such a tiny minority where there's so much more talent out there, but there's no access, and there's no kind of place for those people to go, um, to see these people and up and coming through the system and stuff.
And it's a really interesting thing to reflect on, because not often do we look and think, okay, we're the best in the world at this thing. Where are the shortfalls? Where are we not ticking the boxes? Because we could easily kind of go, we're the best rugby team that's ever existed. There's no rugby nation better than us. We're literally the best. Why would we look at anything about the system that's in play? Well, because there are, you know, it's despite the system. It's not because of that we are where we are, and it's very, I think, exciting to think about what could be afforded to so many more South Africans in terms of access to the sport. And I don't think, I don't think it's a realistic thing for there to be a massive shift away from how high school education and rugby and, well, sports in general are kind of integrated. But I feel like we could borrow from other sports codes and try and implement another layer on top of that, and put more resources and open more clubs that are well funded or better funded in areas that usually or otherwise wouldn't have had access to that. If you have to think about your experience with swimming, from what I know, swimming is predominantly a club-centered sport. If you want to rise up through the ranks in South African,
that is
swimming.
like definitely a club-related sport. Like, yes, there was swimming offered at school and whatnot, but that was just more for like an inter-school kind of thing. Where you really went to go and then to go further with your career in swimming was to go private club kind of level, and that's where a lot of the scouts would also go. And then then you move into more like of the provincial club, also again private swimming teams and stuff like that. So a lot of it wasn't done at school. Yes, there was like inter school and whatnot, but again, a lot of it's just private, it's like swimming classes and stuff like that.
That can also be challenging in terms of an access thing. But out of interest, which club were you at?
Cybersmart.
Where's that?
They had multiple different clubs across the. Yeah, no, but they were.
They sponsor the team.
Yes. So like
Crazy.
there was, I think it was mainly around all the Virgin Actives. So there was one in Central City, and there was one in Tableview, and Tiger Valley was huge. Now there's not as many. Now the actual swimming schools are a lot smaller than what they were back in my day. But yeah, I used to swim for Cybersmart.
Sick.
Yeah.
That's super. I remember my mom's. No. My mom's email address was like carol@cybersmart. something.
Yeah, it was Cybersmart Aquatic or something like that. It was like it had the like the Cybersmart like mascot for the internet company on the swimming cap. It was like a black swimming cap with the white writing, and then it had the mascot like printed on the side.
That's such an interesting kind of marketing channel for them to choose.
And my racing my racing costume had like a massive like Cybersmart thing on the back and everything, and like down the leg. It was crazy.
So that system would be, okay, you're swimming at school, you're pretty good, we see you've got talent, let's kind of, a teacher or someone or a coach or your parents were like, okay, let's do some extra, let's go to a club.
Yeah.
Okay, you're doing well at club level, let's go to province tryouts or whatever. There'll probably be like a Western Province gala with all the clubs, and then you get selected from there.
Yeah, so that the clubs would actually you would swim under different levels. It was like a tier system. So like a club would have like a level 3 swimmer, which would be like Boerland or like Colors, West Province Colors equivalent. So you would still swim under your club, but you would be registered like Western Province swimmer. And then from there, then you can get picked for like national team and stuff like that. Then you'd like fly to Durban or mainly in Durban, and then swim with like all the other guys that are from all the different provinces together. I think Chad Leclerc actually runs that club.
Really? The Durban one?
The Durban one, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because if I liken it to rugby, it's also kind of, it goes, you're playing at your school. Some people are playing club, but you're playing at your school. And then or some people might choose to play at a club and not at their school. Let's say, for instance, if their school doesn't offer rugby, or if they prefer playing at their club, or if their school allows that. Let's say, for instance, Primrose or something, and then you're playing well at school level. Then I don't know if the school puts you forward or if selectors ask for you. I think it's the latter. Then you go to a province trial. It's a round of like a number of rounds of different trials, and then eventually you make a team. And then there's a short kind of competition. If it was under 16, it's Grand Como, where it's like a little festival where you play against the other provinces. It'll be like a national tournament. And then after that, there's the opportunity to be in the kind of the national
Selected,
side.
yeah.
And that's how it kind of works. But I definitely think that it's not. We've kind of spoken of it as if there is no club setup. There is, but it doesn't come close to what the majority of players go through, which is high school. And I mean, it's pretty crazy if you go and look at like historically what schools have produced the most Springboks. The percentages of Springboks that have come from a certain number of schools. And I mean, look, as we said, results-wise, it's working, but things can always work better. And I think that it's been super cool seeing
Think how much more untapped talent there is.
Yes.
If we're getting so much talent from such a small portion, imagine if we expand that.
Yes.
How much more talent there is.
And I mean, also if we look at Rassie Erasmus's transformation of the Springbok setup, specifically from a demographic point of view, how much of that actually translates to more opportunities being given to people at a grassroots level? I don't know. It's certainly a more representative. Would you say so?
In his book, he's got a whole new platform. He started from school. He sort of created before he's director of rugby.
That's amazing.
Sort of trying to find and source different talents in areas like you said that wouldn't have access to that, and sort of try and grow that.
Okay, so it is actually coming from a grassroots level, because obviously there's the whole thing of transformation for the sense of kind of creating more opportunities for people in a professional setup, but you also want that to filter down to where it matters most, which is grassroots, which it's awesome that it is coming from there as well. That's huge. I didn't actually know that.
Really hard on that.
That's incredible.
Just going from his book. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Although I don't think that the current team is, I think that work that he's doing is definitely going to filter through more in the next decade or so, where we'll see all these kids who are getting opportunities come through, which is actually even more optimistic and exciting, because if it's like you said, the last 4 years he's been putting this work in, the rewards are going to really kind of come to fruition.
It's just you always want it to be that they create the opportunities, but then they're sustainable, and it's not just a 2-3 year wonder, and then like the funding gets dropped and then it all goes back to how it started. Like it needs to be like something that can then continue through the years and like sustain itself.
Yes.
Because it's all very well to build up something and then it all kind of disappears after a couple of years.
For sure.
So yeah, I think that's also important.
But that's really exciting, and also something that I think a lot of spaces within South Africa in terms of creating opportunity can learn from. I mean, I'd love to read that book. What is it called? Is it just called Rassie?
his thing.
Well,
I have no idea.
but no. What is the book
What
called?
is the book called?
Yeah, it's called Rassi, yeah.
Is it actually?
Yeah.
Okay.
Rassi by Rassi and Rassi.
Did he write it?
Co-written now.
Okay. I think that's it's sport, and for some reason military stuff ends up being very analogous with a lot of other things in life. Like people will use those strategies or techniques and apply them in other contexts. And I think, I mean, I'm going to have a look at the book. I'm not speaking from knowing the book, but that sounds like something that also can be emulated in other areas across the world, not just in a South African context, but where there's a lack of opportunity because of things that have happened previously. And it can like open that up, because my main criticism a lot of the time with, is the word redress. It is redressive measures, like affirmative action type stuff, is that I feel a lot of the time someone who is, I have been kind of subject to, okay, you're in the team, we're trying to like tick boxes around this. It just feels like tokenism, and it feels like a plaster on an issue that is far deeper. And also, I shouldn't have gotten that opportunity. I previously disadvantaged individual, as in I would have been disadvantaged in the past, but there are far more people who are more deserving of the opportunity than I was. I went to a really good school. I had access to these opportunities. Why are you giving me this thing because I'm brown? It's like, that's, for me, that's doing nothing. You're changing nothing. You need to go and find somebody, like, it's the easy way out. Like, you need to go and find someone
Box tick.
who exactly, like, which is tokenism, which is actually not good. But if it is something that's coming from grassroots, I think that's awesome, because finding people who kind of tick the boxes, are you actually creating opportunity for people who otherwise wouldn't have had it? Maybe not necessarily, because you need to go and actually look at what that person's background is and dig deeper. But obviously, yes, there's also the importance of like creating a space where it feels welcoming for people from different backgrounds and different races and creeds and whatnot. But yeah, obviously, this is a whole podcast in its own. But yeah, really chuffed that we actually somehow segued onto this topic, because it's.
But
really
I think it's really important, especially when talking about rugby and rugby in South Africa, and just sport in South Africa in general. It's always important to talk about these things, because we want to develop something that can then like benefit the next generation, and give the people that don't have the opportunity to then perform at the top level. Give them the resources they need.
And I think everything that we are doing and trying to do is important and amazing. And I'm not a policymaker, genius man, but I do think there's always room for improvement. Disclaimer. But guys, thank you so much. Gideon, thanks for the chat.
Thank you. That was awesome.
Yeah, Mark, shot for the input
Thanks,
about
Mark.
Rassi Barassi Erasmus. And we will catch you all in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to the show, guys. We love answering specific questions. So if there's anything you want to know, leave a comment or reach out to us directly at Horizen ZA on Instagram, or email us at movement@horizengym.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Seb Prentice, and this is Beyond Physical.